Welcome back. You're watching SA Today with me, Unati Bagyashe. Let's continue here now. The academic program in KwaZulu-Natal has been severely disrupted as schools in flood-stricken schools had to halt learning and teaching. 57 learners, one teacher and one food handler died in the floods in the province. Many schools are inaccessible and covered in mud. Some are situated across swollen rivers and dams with eroded roads and broken bridges. Now, let's get an update. We're now joined via Zoom by KwaZulu-Natal Education spokesperson Muzi Mahlambi. Muzi, thank you so much for your time. I mean, just hearing these numbers, over 600 schools in the province were affected, 124 seriously damaged. How many schools are still inaccessible for learning? Muzi, could you hear my question?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Nat, and afternoon to your viewers. Like you correctly pointed out, yes, over 600 schools, 630 to be precise, were affected last week. But as we were working on clearing up some of the schools, as we concluded the week last week on Friday, over 500 of them had started working partially so, some on full operation, because some, it was a matter of getting hosepipe and cleaning the school. Some, it's a matter of windows. So we had identified and categorized the extent of damages from all these 600 schools. Only 125 schools are severely damage. With regards to the schools, 101 schools that could not be accessed, the number has decreased. We are now able to access about only 62 schools are still to be cleared, but we are working around the clock with the Department of Transport to have the rest of the schools cleared by the conclusion of the week. I know another question will be what plan do we have in terms of a recovery plan to recover the lost time. We have begun to quantify as to how many days do we have in the second term, and we have 59 days, and we have since identified to say if then we had lost the whole of last week, that will amount to 6.7%. If then the whole of this week will be lost for some of the learners, that will be 13%, which begins to say if then we're able to come up with those percentages in terms of the lost time, and the recovery plan of ours will also will equal the amount of time that has been lost in terms of us mitigating against the lost time in terms of teaching and learning. So there are a number of interventions that we have devised. Some of the program has been shared with the schools. Schools are starting to implement those with the assistance of the district officials, be it subject advisors and other officials that have been dispatched to assist in unpacking how to go about implementing the recovery plan.
Muzi, I'm glad you answered that question on lost time, but I wanted us, before we even got to that, to still start talking about the recovery. We know and we understand that, a lot of the pupils in the flooding are still missing. And as you said, 57 have died, but many more missing, as well as educators. What is the latest in terms of that? What are you hearing from parents as well as educators in as far as those children that are still missing and the recovery thereof?
The latest that we have in terms of the learners that have passed on that we are getting from our schools and circuits is that the number is standing at 64. But with regards to educators, the number still stands at 1, and another one being the food handler. Last week, we reported that 5 learners were missing. What we have not been able to do is to whether they are accounted for by the number of bodies that have been recovered by the rescuers as they continue to work in search of the bodies. In total, the province had reported the missing persons to be 66. So there are many bodies that have since been recovered between the time we spoke and today. So what we haven't established is whether those are amongst the recovered bodies will account for our children.
Now, what you've given us, just a view in terms of how the department plans to save this academic year. One can only imagine that the pupils and the students that you will be teaching will need a lot of psychological help, as well as the educators. What are the plans in terms of that, from the Department of Education as you start to rebuild and get into gear in terms of education?
Indeed, hand in glove with the recovery plan, we have also devised what we call the psychosocial support program that our psychological services unit is leading, but also working with the social development as the lead department in this regard. We are implementing that. There are a lot of learners that are displaced. Some are housed in community halls, some in other makeshift accommodation that has been arranged by the provincial government. And we can tell you that we have even identified that we have about 1,555 learners that are in those temporary accommodation. They wake up from those community halls going to our schools, and we know that psychologically that affects them. And we are giving them that kind of a support. And our educators also, in dealing with such learners, they also, because they are emotionally involved, they see these learners, some coming to school without uniform because their homes were washed away, and they lost everything. And that on its own, it's a torture to both our educators and our learners, hence the psychosocial support that we are giving them.
Absolutely. Muzi, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
That's a KZN education spokesperson, Muzi Mahlambi. Let's take